From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome, everybody. I'm George Barnum. I'm the president of the Chesapeake chapter, and we're delighted that you're here. This is the third time that we have done one of these events for our Mike Denker Fellows. It seems unbelievable that this is the third class of Denker Fellows, and we're delighted to have 3 of the 5 this year here and giving presentations. Mike Denker, known to many of us in this room, but perhaps not to the fellows so much and to others, was a really beloved and faithful member of this chapter. He was the president for a long time. And, above and beyond that, he was really one of the coolest people that ever lived. And when he was taken from us 4 or so years ago, the chapter did a certain amount of searching around for a way to honor his contributions to us. And there were lots and lots of ways to describe Mike, all of them laudatory, but he was a builder. He was a builder by profession. And he was a builder. He was a builder of friendship and of relationships between students and mentors. And so we felt that our Denker Fellowship was a way to sort of honor that and hope to sort of carry it on. Bringing students into the chapter, getting them hooked up with, if we can, with people who are active and working in the chapter. And also to open up the wonderful world of the American Printing History Association to them. We're going to be working this year under Casey's leadership to sort of formalize the Denker Fellowship a little bit more than it has been in our own heads, and to find more ways to get the fellows together with people and to offer more opportunities than we've done up to this point. So that will be coming along. And it is the time of year when we are recruiting for the 2017 class of fellows. So the way that we do this seems to work best when it's face-to-face, when it's somebody knows. So if you know somebody who would be a likely person to be a Denker Fellow next year, about the only requirement we really have is that they have to be a student. But beyond that, we are a very broad church here, and the application process is hardly even a process. So talk to Casey or to me or to Chris. I have a couple of chapter announcements to make. We have, thank goodness, a slate for chapter elections coming up, and Chris tells me that the ballots are in the mail, so look for them and return them promptly. And we are going to be planning a holiday get-together of some kind, so stay tuned and watch the email for that. Casey, do you have any words?
Amazingly beautiful calendars for sale, only $20. You can find those on the website. I brought a couple today, so you can take a look at them. I think those 2 are already sold. 25. It's 25 online, because that includes the shipping.
And an expert.
And pint glasses.
And pint glasses. Never forget the pint glasses. So without any further faffing about, I will introduce Suzanne Allen, who will then pass along to the other 2. Suzanne, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Allen. I finished in the art in the book program at the Corcoran in May, and while I was in the program, I received the Denker Fellowship, and it's a great honor to receive a fellowship. that honors such a beloved member of your chapter. While I was at the Corcoran, I did a short paper on a man named Simon Benning, who you will see in this talk is the father of the woman I'm going to talk about. He lived in the 1500s, 1400s, 1500s. He was an illuminator of manuscripts. He was a painter and a miniaturist, and he was at the top of his art. He was one of the most well-known illuminators in Europe at the time. And so I'll talk about him a little bit more. So we're going to talk about Levina Teerlinc. Paintrix is the feminine of painter. Levina Teerlinc was a rarity. She was a successful woman artist in the Elizabethan era. She served all 4 Tudor monarchs, in particular Elizabeth I. She was a gentlewoman and friend to Elizabeth, and she painted miniature portraits of the Queen. Teerlinc was born 1510 to 1520 in Flanders, the eldest of Simon Benning's 5 daughters, and the only one known to work as an artist. Her heritage as illuminator, miniaturist, scrivener, and calligrapher can be traced to her father and grandfather, Simon and Sanders Benning, masters of a specialized art form, the illuminated manuscript. They worked with other noted painters on the Grimani Breviary, circa 1510, which is a book of prayers. The Grimani Breviary has 1,670 pages, of which 120 are full-page miniatures. It represents the height of Flemish manuscript illumination. The Marquand Library at Yale University holds a facsimile copy of the breviary, and one of their curators said, "The borders of this page and many others throughout the breviary are filled with exquisite trompe-l'oeil depictions of natural forms. The trompe-l'oeil elements are a hallmark of the Benning studio." He was famous for these very naturalistic borders. Miniatures developed from the tradition of religious manuscript illumination. The miniatures in the Grimani Breviary are part of an enormous book, while Teerlinc's miniatures were usually painted in vellum glued to playing cards. They could be as small as a little over 1.5 inches by less than 1 1/4 inches, so the works I will show you are enlarged many times. Working on a tiny surface, Teerlinc created realistic images of Elizabeth and other figures in the court. An accident of birth set Teerlinc on her career path. She had no brother to take over her father's studio, so Simon taught her his art. His studio produced magnificent, one-of-a-kind books, but as Susan James says in The Feminine Dynamic in English Art, Simon Benning took Flemish illumination to its final zenith. It was an art form which became obsolete upon his death. Illuminated manuscripts were in decline because of the invention of the printing press and movable type. But Teerlinc's skills were transferable. She used them to forge a career in service to royalty. By the late 1530s, she had finished her apprenticeship and became a fully fledged member of her father's workshop. She was admitted to the Bruges Painters Guild, which was required for her career as a miniaturist. She married George Teerlinc, the son of a prosperous gentry family, between 1540 and 1542. The couple moved to England in 1546 when Catherine Parr, the 6th and last queen of Henry VIII, hired Teerlinc as court painter after Hans Holbein died. The Teerlincs were invited to live in London because Catherine Parr had learned of Levina's skills as an artist. George Teerlinc's career was secondary to his wife's. He promoted himself as an aristocrat and became a gentleman pensioner. the male equivalent of a maid of honor. This helped advance both his and his wife's position at the English court. Susan Fry, author of Pens and Needles, Women's Textualities in Early Modern England, says, George may have been a dealer in tapestries, textiles, and artwork produced in the Netherlands, and it's likely that he acted as an agent for his wife. Levina Teerlinc probably spent the period immediately after her arrival in England working for Queen Catherine and her sister Anne Parr, a prominent art patron. After Henry VIII died, Teerlinc worked for Edward VI and Mary I, and when Elizabeth became queen in 1558, Teerlinc was retained as a miniaturist for the rest of her life. As court painter to Elizabeth, she was paid a salary of £40 a year. In addition, she received £20 a year directly from Elizabeth. This was twice what Hans Holbein had received and more than the salary of Nicholas Hilliard, a celebrated court painter who is better known today than Teerlinc. Hilliard's salary did not reach £40 a year until 1599. Another woman artist, Susanna Horenboot, paved the way for Teerlinc. She was from the Netherlands and was active from the 1520s to the 1540s. She was trained by her father, the artist Gerard Horenboot, and her brother Lucas was a well-known miniaturist. Henry VIII brought the Horenboot family to England to paint portrait miniatures and illuminated manuscripts. Horenboot may have lived into the 1550s. By 1554 or earlier, she had died. Now I'll talk about Teerlinc's work. Teerlinc worked for Edward VI, Henry VIII's son. In summer 1547, at the beginning of Edward's reign, Teerlinc appears on the list of the king's artists. Her appearance on this list was a unique achievement for a 16th century woman, and it's even more significant because she is listed first. The record shows that in 1552, Teerlinc presented a group of miniatures to the king as a New Year's gift. When Mary came to the throne in 1553, Teerlinc was retained as court painter. The earliest surviving example of Teerlinc's art is a portrait of Mary on the Coram Regie roll of October 1553. Coram Regie rolls were records of the proceedings of the king's bench, and the text of the roll always began with a capital P for placita, which is a public court or assembly. Mary's portrait was painted within the P. So you can't see the whole P, but you can see Mary's portrait. The P is surrounding the portrait, but I'm not able to show you the whole letter P. Also for Mary, Teerlinc made an illuminated manuscript, Queen Mary's Manual for Blessing Cramp Rings and Touching for the Evil, the Rituals of the Royal Healing Ceremonies. This is circa 1553 to 1558, so it could have been done in any of the 5 years of Mary's reign. Cramp rings were given to women to ward off the pain of menstruation and childbirth, and I don't know what they look like. So that's the description. And here is the manuscript. Touching for the evil refers to the ritual of the king or queen touching a person suffering from scrofula, an inflammation of the lymph glands that can cause hearing loss and blindness. The recto is titled, The Ceremony for the Healing of Them That Be Diseased with the King's Evil. The verso shows Mary applying the royal touch. And there she is, there's a little boy, little child there, and she's applying the touch. It's blurry. When Elizabeth became queen in 1558, Teerlinc became a gentlewoman and friend to the monarch. She was talented at making her way in court. Susan James says, although technically a royal servant, Teerlinc appears to have been accepted at the English court as an honorary aristocrat. she had known Elizabeth since the latter was 11 years old. Because of her presence in the royal chamber, Teerlinc had significant influence with the Queen. In Elizabeth's court, New Year's Day was an occasion for giving lavish gifts. From 1558 to 1576, Teerlinc painted miniatures that she gave to the Queen as New Year's gifts. This is a partial list of her work. And these are extracts from the official records, so you see the differences in the spellings. In the box, finely painted. Look at the way finely painted is spelled. And finely painted on the first one, 1559, is spelled differently. And her last name, Teerlinc. There's another spelling of Teerlinc and Teerlinc, so the spellings are not consistent at all, the spellings of her name. Elizabeth did not like to sit for portraits, but she is known to have sat for 5 artists, including Teerlinc in 1551 and Nicholas Hilliard in 1572. Susan James says, Teerlinc's miniatures were intimate, private gifts, evidence of the close bond shared by these 2 women. Painted for the Queen's eyes only, they represent a private conversation between ruler and artist. Teerlinc had access to the Queen that a male painter would not have had. Susan James says that Teerlinc's work helped Mary and Elizabeth assert their God-given right to rule England by ensuring that their images were prominently displayed. In addition to miniatures, portraits, and manuscripts, it's likely that Teerlinc created heraldic and legal documents and designed seals, coins, and needlework. Scholars attribute designs for the Great Seal of Elizabeth I to Teerlinc. The designs were executed by another artist. In 1573, a manual entitled A Very Proper Treatise, wherein is briefly set forth the art of living, never put in print before this time. The title on this one is a little different because it's a different edition. But it was published anonymously in 1573. Limning refers to miniature painting. James believes that Teerlinc wrote the manual, thus ensuring that the art of miniature painting would be passed on to a new generation of artists. A Very Proper Treatise was a detailed how-to manual intended for painters who wanted to learn the art of miniatures. It was useful because miniatures were very popular with Elizabeth and her court. The Queen exchanged them with other European rulers. Women wore them as jewelry, and they were given and received in romantic and courtship rituals. To talk about Levina Teerlinc's work, I need to also discuss Nicholas Hilliard. Hilliard lived from 1547 to 1619, so he was 30 to 40 years younger than Teerlinc. In about 1570, Hilliard became miniature painter to Queen Elizabeth. Thus, Teerlinc and Hilliard were painting miniatures during the same period, since Teerlinc lived until 1576. Roy Strong, a prominent art historian, and Susan James believe that Teerlinc taught Nicholas Hilliard his art. But art historians differ in their opinions about whether Teerlinc or Hilliard executed some of the works, and caution is needed. Some works originally attributed to Hilliard have been more recently attributed to Teerlinc, especially by feminist art critics. Teerlinc did not sign her work, and very few miniatures from this period exist, so attribution is difficult. Roy Strong and other critics have associated Teerlinc with an important miniature known as an Elizabethan Maundy. Painted around 1565, it illustrates the Queen washing the feet of poor women on Maundy Thursday, the day before Good Friday. However, Susan James believes Teerlinc did not paint this miniature. The Lute miniature, circa 1574 to 1576, has been attributed to both Hilliard and Teerlinc. Strong and other scholars have associated Teerlinc with less sophisticated miniature portraits of Elizabeth as princess and as queen. And this is Elizabeth as a princess, and you can see how small the diameter is. This is thousands of times bigger. This is Elizabeth as Queen of England. This is a miniature of Lady Catherine Grey, Elizabeth's cousin and a possible successor to the throne. This is Mary Dudley, Lady Sidney, and this is Lady Hunsdon. These are some of Teerlinc's miniatures. Strong writes that in these miniatures and the Elizabethan Mondi, the figures are not particularly well drawn. They are typically elongated and the arms are always very thin. You can see that here, the very thin arms. He says the draftsmanship is weak and the painting is thin. However, he also says that Teerlinc's work shows a degree of innovation in subject matter. Her miniatures may be lacking in technique, but the fact that they were created by a woman artist in the Tudor era makes them notable. A side-by-side comparison of Teerlinc's and Hilliard's work shows differences in technique. The Roses miniature on the right is generally attributed to Hilliard. The miniature shows great delicacy of touch, and Elizabeth's expression is serene. The miniature of Elizabeth as Queen of England, attributed to Teerlinc, is less refined. It shows a more girlish queen with an expression that is not uncheerful, but also a little blank. Susan Durand, in The Myth of Elizabeth, says that in Hilliard's miniature, the white roses in Elizabeth's hair and pinned to her dress signify the chastity of a marriageable maiden. The same flowers are present in portraits of other young unmarried women. In the Queen's black and white costume, white symbolizes purity, simplicity, faithfulness, and joy, all desirable qualities in a woman seeking a marriage partner. In this case, black stands for constancy, not grief. During the first 8 months of 1572, Elizabeth was negotiating for marriage with the French Duke of Anjou, and it's likely that the miniature was painted with this in mind. I've talked about Levina's work. Let me give you a little more information on the rest of her life. In 1547 or 1548, Levina and George Teerlinc traveled back to Flanders. She was pregnant on their return to England, and her son Marcus was born in 1548 or 1549 in Calais. Calais belonged to England at the time, and the Teerlincs wanted their son to be a subject of the English crown so he could inherit property in England. In 1566, her husband leased land in Stepney, a district of London, and built a house for the large sum of £500. The same year, she and her husband and son became English citizens. Little known today, her career almost entirely eclipsed by her successor Hilliard, Teerlinc is nevertheless an example of a talented woman succeeding in a field dominated by men. Look closely and you will find her, first in her father's workshop, learning her trade, and later, painting with a minute brush on a tiny piece of vellum, capturing Elizabeth's likeness for the Queen's pleasure and for foreign princes and diplomats. Teerlinc died on June 23, 1576, probably in Stepney. She was between 56 and 66 years old at the time of her death. She was buried at the St. Dunstan Parish Church in Stepney. No portrait of her has been found. Thank you. Are there questions or?
We'll do questions at the end.
Okay.
We can make it.
Hello everyone, my name is Malia Bellis, and first I want to thank you all for having me here to share my testimonial with all of you. I'm here to talk about my experience and how I grew into the letterpress love throughout my years in college. First, to give you a brief background on me, I was born and raised in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, and I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, and the first in my family to pursue a degree in the field of arts. Though I excelled in other fields, I felt that my passion lied in design. So my parents were extremely supportive and not at all surprised, especially when I chose a competitive program really close to home. So then I began my studies as a communication design student at Kutztown University. Fast forward to my sophomore year. It was the spring of 2014, and everyone was starting to line up their summer jobs, and I was not having it with going back to the retail business. I was ready to get work in the program that I was growing to love. I wanted to do something with design. So I approached Professor Ann Lemon, who came here with me today, and to see if she had any advice. I didn't have many classes under her instruction, but she seemed like a very approachable and sociable lady, so I thought, hey, maybe she has some advice that she could give me. And she told me, well, I'll keep my eyes open to see if anybody wants a sophomore on their team, but hey, I'm doing this project over the summer. One of my fellow faculty members just donated a letterpress to the university, and I would love to see this go up and running so that students could use it by the fall. But it is a lot of work, and I don't think I can do this on my own. So do you want to be my intern? And it didn't take much thought for me to say yes. Even though I had zero knowledge of letterpress at that point, I was ready to explore this new form of art that I had thought was lost in time. So I showed up to room 209, and by the looks of things, I knew I was ready to earn my keep. I saw a stack of rusted galley trays and composing strips in one corner, and a box of ink that looked like it had been resurrected from the 1960s, and just a pile of type drawers that had a thick layer of dust covering it. See, many of our type drawers had either been donated from the university pre-computer age, or they were donated by the local newspaper. Regardless, the type drawers were all being exhumed from old dusty basements, and they just had a piece of cardboard duct taped to the top of it, so none of the pieces were in the right spot. So when I wasn't scrubbing rust off of trays, I was learning to navigate the California job case forward and backward and sideways. We developed this machine to try to get all the dust out of the little nooks and crannies of all of the type drawers. It was a lot of work. It was kind of fun though. It was like kids on Christmas morning. One of our friends, Ron Lamb, would bring up these type drawers from the basement, and we'd open them, and the reactions would vary from, ooh, 72-point Helvetica bold, to like, oh, 10-point folio light. So, after a few weeks, the room somewhat started to make sense. We took a lot of supply tips and organization tips from our friends at Lead Graffiti, and we tweaked them around to fit in our little 10-foot by 6-foot room that we call the studio. So after hours of laborious organization, we finally had our very own tabletop C&P pilot press. The room was complete with 3 type drawers, 1 set of furniture, and about a dozen cans of very old ink. Anyway, once the press had been up and running, we decided to name it the Landis Press, after Professor John Landis, who had taught at Kutztown University. He had taught many of my own professors, and he was an advocate of hand-done work. He really stressed the value in taking your time and putting the effort into your work. In fact, it was only when he went on sabbatical for a semester that the university was able to pull the presses out of the room and replace them with computers. Anyway, once we had the press up and running, we had the honor of inviting him back for a little induction ceremony for the press. There we announced the official opening of the press, complete with the cutting of a ribbon. So after the press Letterpress was officially open for student use, I was given permission by the head of our design department to host some group sessions in order to give an introductory course on Letterpress. It was a simple 2-hour course where fellow students could come in and they could see type other than on the screen, and they could quick print a little piece of their own so that maybe they could use Letterpress as a medium in future projects. So most of my junior year was spent teaching and then slowly making small improvements to the room. Getting new ink, procuring more type, and exploring new methods of printing. We started printing on everything, from tape to cardboard to linoleum blocks. We have a little wall there of our experimentation. One of our experiments, we tried getting these little cut pieces of paper to print. Comes out very fuzzy. Regardless, it was fun experimentation. I was able to help many of my peers utilize this press as well. We would make everything from little coasters to posters, and then I would make my own holiday cards and spread some of those around. And we even made our own prints to sell at local craft fairs. So in comes my senior year, and as part of our program, we are to have an internship for credit. And I was getting ready to intern at a small package design company in West Reading. And Anne approaches me with a proposition of hers. For the past few years, she has overseen a project for the Kutztown Historical Society and paired with them to make a publication entitled Along the Saucony. For that project, she would pair a student or duo together, and they would make a nicely laid out book that would be filled with local history. And each year, the student or duo would make a nicely laid out spread of book and design a dust jacket that would be conceptual to the theme of that year. The year 2016 was planned to be all about the town's bicentennial celebration. The Historical Society had this idea to create a memorabilia of artifacts. They had brought together all these old items from past celebrations, and they wanted to put them all together and preserve them in a book. To make a long story short, the two students who had started the project, they were amazing designers, but they were unable to see the project through. So that's when Anne approached me and asked if I would pick up the project where it was left off. And it seemed like an interesting topic, as well as a great way to build my portfolio as a senior. So I agreed. So as many of you are probably aware, whenever you take over a project from someone else, it can be a nightmare. And for me, this was like being handed a jigsaw puzzle, where I knew all the pieces were there, but getting them to fit in the right spot was a mess. Between rebuilding a corrupted file and then losing photos and getting some old documents rebuilt, the surprises never seemed to end. Thankfully, I had some amazing photos that were taken by one of the previous students who had worked on it, and they had already started a nice grid to work from. And thank God I had some of the most patient people working with me, because this was already about 3 months past due, and there were 12 rounds of revision between me and getting this book off to print. Also, while I was working on the interior, I was consistently tinkering with the book's cover and what I wanted to do for that. The dust jackets in past years had been letterpressed, so we wanted to keep that tradition going. However, in the past years, they had used polymer plates. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we printed the jacket with bare-bone, hand-set metal type? And it seemed like a great idea at the time, but I did not know what I was getting myself into. But it would have great historical significance. I mean, most of the type that we had was historic to the university or the town and the local paper that would be featured in the interior of the book. Well, I dove in with that idea in mind. And just the concept that I would challenge myself to make the most complicated thing I had ever printed. I wanted the cover to be minimal, while still stretching the idea of what could be done with our very modest collection of type. I spent hours poring over images and tutorials of how to make angles work with metal type and trying to break out of that grid. When the interior was on about round 10, we took this lockup, wrapped it in cellophane and bubble wrap, and put it in a box and drove it down from Pennsylvania to Delaware to our friends at Lead Graffiti, where they helped us fill in the little gaps that were missing in this lockup and assisted us in printing the covers on their Vandercook press. We decided that we would print with just black and white to match the scheme of past celebrations and to keep the minimal historical feel. The exterior of the jacket shows the finished product, and the interior cover shows the lockup that was used to print the jacket. So shortly after the jackets were printed, the interior of the book was printed and bound as well. And in the end, we had just over 70 copies all put together. I worked really hard to show off the amount of design the Landis Press had to offer, not just in the cover, but also in the chapter headers. All in all, the book tells a great story of historic craftsmanship and memorabilia and celebrations that have gone by. Since graduating in the spring, I've been working at a small wayfinding design company in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. There, we develop gateways and vehicular pedestrian signage for cities all across the nation, from Anchorage to Austin to Annapolis. I'm able to get back to the Landis Press every once in a while and work on a few projects of my own. I recently was able to print out some Mother's Day cards and tried my hand the first time on wedding invitations for a friend of mine. My experience in letterpress and printmaking has allowed me to develop a passion for detailed and hand-done work, and I'm extremely thankful for that. I continue to bring that into my work every day, and while my current placement does not allow me the funds to have my own press, I plan to one day acquire one of my own so that I can continue to push my skills and really develop that form of art that I have grown to love over the past few years. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jodi Hoover. I'm also very honored to be one of your Denker Fellows. I'm here today to talk about a little bit about my research and my artwork. I'm currently a part-time MFA candidate at Towson University. I'm also working full-time as a librarian at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County, which explains why I have not been to any of your things at all this year, for which I very much apologize. And some of you may also know me, and I think this chapter has been up to see Betty and Edgar Swearen's artist book collection, and I was the person like moving things all over the place. I've worked with them since 2001, so anyway, I love artist books. So as an artist, I've always been interested in combining words and images to tell stories. My undergraduate degree is in illustration, but I quickly realized that commercial illustration work was not going to be for me. When I was introduced to printmaking and artist books, that way of working really clicked for me, because it was a way that would allow me to tell my stories and yet retain complete control over my materials, over the process that I used, over the binding, the whole thing. So this is one of my books that is very loosely based on a couple of Bible verses in Revelation about a star that destroys the world. And this is another one where I worked with a friend, had taken a microfiction class, and so her story worked really well for my books because I like keeping the text like very, very minimal so that you can actually sit and read them. Because I understand that part of the experience with artist books is often not being able to like sit and hang out with them for hours. So this was about, I guess, a snail love triangle is the easiest way to So alongside my prints and books, I've always created drawings. The drawings were sort of, again, part of my storytelling process. I always think of them as snapshots, sort of a quick window into a feeling or character. And again, you know, they're very illustrative. Reactions to these were always sort of mixed. So, like, some people would be like, I don't get this, it's for children, or whatever. And then some people would come and tell me, like, really elaborate stories about what they thought was going on. Of course, those are the people that I loved. But, and like sometimes they were just about me telling jokes. Like, for instance, these two guys who, like, you know, they're really into each other, but the one doesn't have any feet and the other doesn't have any wings. So this interaction is going to be really limited. And they can never really be together. Anyway. Well, I've consistently kept a studio practice going. I've also earned a degree, a master's degree in library science, and I've been working as a full-time librarian for 7 or 8 years now. And in the summer of 2013, I was misdiagnosed, but I was told that I was going blind and that there was nothing that they could do about it. Thankfully, that was completely untrue. But I was like, you know what? I have an opportunity where I can go back to school, and I'm going to do it. So I applied to the Towson MFA program and started there in the fall of 2014. When I applied for this fellowship and also when I started school, I really thought that I was going to be doing a lot of printmaking, that I was going to be doing some letterpress work, and I have done a little bit of that. But as you know, art programs sometimes go, once you're there, you end up doing something completely different. So we're going to talk about drawings because that's what I've been doing. But in case you don't know, Towson actually has a quite lovely print shop. And then that other picture, in the beginning of every semester, they don't let students into the shop until they can pass a skills test. So there are some beautiful few weeks where, like, only grad students have the combination to the shops. And if you want to go in and, like, use 3 tables and, like, all the things, you can, because no one else is there. So that is me being really happy one, I believe, Saturday night when I was a giant nerd and was at the shop by myself for hours. So my research interests have ended up moving down a few different avenues. My family is Pennsylvania German. I don't know if you guys know. Pennsylvania German groups are actually divided into 2 categories. There's the fancy Pennsylvania Germans. Those are the ones that have the hex signs. Mostly, I believe, Lutheran and Methodist. And then there's the plain Pennsylvania Germans, and those are the Amish and the Mennonite. The Amish and the Mennonites only ever made up 25% of Pennsylvania German population as a whole, so small percent. And my family is Mennonite from Lancaster County. So I started looking at traditional Amish and Mennonite quilting patterns. So not the block designs, but the actual, like, hand-stitched quilting patterns. And taking a look at the different variations used in those. So this one is from a book that I was looking at. The one on the right is quilted by my grandmother, who was an amazing quilter, and also painter and furniture maker. Like, there was really not much she couldn't do. In addition, I also started looking at Pennsylvania German Fractor, which I was not previously aware of. These were things created mostly between 1740 and 1860. Generally small, always on paper, colored with ink rather than paint. And they were used to commemorate important events, so like a birth or a baptism. More prevalent within the fancy Pennsylvania German groups, but also found in the plain communities as well. for me and my aesthetic, I was delighted to discover, you know, beautiful, crazy flowers and creatures and just sort of some beautiful folk art design work that really appealed to me. There's been a lot written on what the different things mean. Some people are like, flowers mean one thing, and, you know, the lady with wings is an angel, the different kinds of birds mean different things. But what I found to be interesting is there's also just some weird stuff that people cannot fully explain. Like mermaids show up. Now there are not a lot of mermaids in the Bible or in Pennsylvania. So it's just kind of this weird thing that they're like, I don't know why they decided on mermaids, but it's something that definitely shows up. So I started to draw, and you know, these were just some early drawings where I was looking at different ways that I could combine that sort of aesthetic that I was seeing from Proctor into the way that I like to see things. The radio towers always appeared in my other drawings, sort of about communication. So I was playing around with that. And then as I was going through this process, I started to think about ways that I could get text incorporated into the drawings and ways to push the narrative storytelling elements. I went back to my roots, my illustration roots, and was really looking at a lot of different children's books and reading. There's not a lot of critical analysis of children's book art. There should be, but there is not. So I was reading some things about that, but really thinking about how, because if anybody's trying to write for children's books, right, it's hard. People will tell you it's one of the most difficult types of writing they've done, because we have to communicate a lot of things in some very simple sentences. And then thinking about the way that that hangs out and relates to the images. So these are just pages from a couple of books in my collection. And so this is kind of where we end up. So one of the pieces I've been working on recently, this was the first one and what turned into a series of 3. It's fairly large for me. It's 42 by 34. And so it's on gesso paper, and the final piece is then stretched like a canvas after the drawing is finished. This is a little nerve-wracking. I actually do have a picture of this other process. And so what I was doing is, once the paper was gessoed, I have it out on the table, and I use acrylic ink. And because the paper is treated, the ink doesn't dry right away. So as the ink is drying, I would come back into the studio and tip the paper to make it run. And then that dictated the structure. So those drips became the building. And I'm somebody that is used to working with like a pretty tight sketch, particularly when I go to something this large. I had nothing. So it's just as it progressed, I would start adding things in, but not really knowing like how things were gonna layer. I use a projector and take the quilt patterns, the stitching patterns, and project them onto the paper, and then pencil and paint them in. Which is every bit as time consuming as it sounds. And considering how much I resisted learning how to quilt, like I can barely sew, my grandmother would have thought this was hilarious, because it is actually very similar to how you would put the patterns on the fabric in order to quilt them. So one of the last things I did with this was put in the text. It was a way to again give an access point to the drawing, where I'm like, I just created this really weird drawing, and people need to have some sort of way to enter that and to sort of get an idea of where I am. Specifically, I went with cursive writing because it also occurred to me that there will come a point where that is difficult for people to read. And so it's sort of, there's a point at which, I don't know, it becomes more of a mystery. To get some of that texture on the little house, it's like thin paper collage and then oil pastel. So I'll show you on one of the others. There's actually a lot of dimension to the drawings. This was the second one in that series, The Ogre Regretted. So again, using that same technique and sort of, the ogre didn't actually even appear in this until about halfway through. I wasn't sure. And the full sentence is, the ogre regretted her choice. And I know that it's supposed to be ogress, but ogress is a terrible sounding word, so I chose ogre. And then you can see, hopefully, a little bit on that drawing on the right, as taken at an angle. So I used thin paper to sort of build up that figure so that you can, so it really has a texture in person. The last one is The Restless Wind Fell in Love. So the little mask-like guy that's been moving through. I think this is a happy ending because the wind is happy. It might not be as happy for the little mask guy, I don't know. We're gonna say that he's fine. And this one too, again, using those quilt patterns as a way to enhance and obscure, and really messing around with the idea that the space can be three-dimensional but also flat. As I went through and kind of let that last word fade out even on the paper. This is one that I recently finished. It doesn't have the text, but I used, again, collage work from a larger drawing that ended up getting wrecked for reasons we won't go into. This is actually on canvas, so it's drawing on canvas. I refer to them as drawings, and we're probably moving towards painting at this point. And again, the house shows up as like a safe place. And then I added in, I was looking at like Victorian era children's books with like the black and white drawings, and added in this bunny. The title is Her Wishes Were Small, and I guess it's sort of a fairy godmother, guardian angel type thing, but also a little ominous because we don't know the intent of that big bunny. I will show you very quickly with some exceptionally poor photos of a drawing that I'm currently working on. So, although it's on canvas, so go on. Again, the flowers, the types of things you would see in the fractor, painted and collaged on quilt patterns, working against collage, using the ink as a way to sort of formulate the surface. I think this is going to be about bees, but the bees haven't shown up yet, but I'm confident that they will. Nor have I completely decided what sort of text is going to go with this. Just a couple details of how that looks. Again, this is, I don't know what size to get. I would put it size. It's like 30 by 40, I think, 32 by 40. So they're fairly large. What's next? I am going to hang it. I'm going to be in an exhibition this spring with a ceramic artist named Brad Blair. He does ceramic monsters that are very like mechanical, like crazy mad scientist experiments. So I think that my like nature monsters, fairy tale monsters will fit in well with his. Because I'm part-time and because the Towson program is 60 credits, so normally going full-time it would take me 3 years. I don't finish until the fall of 2018, so I'll be around and as a student for a bit. There's definitely some more books in here somewhere. It's just, you know, not right now, but I have plenty of time. So books, I play around with things, and we'll definitely get there. But thank you.
Questions?
Your illustrations with like the squid or the octopus remind me. You ever seen the large mural that you pass when you're going through Wilmington, Delaware, on the side of the building, which I think has a way. It's very similar in kind of attitude, not in style. But I was struck by thinking these would, as a civic gesture, these would make terrific murals.
Maybe. That would be really large. But I was reading a book about an octopus when I drew that in, so it is not, it's not completely out of left field.
I think a storyboarded book through several blocks of the city would be really terrific. How hard could it be?
You're working big. A little bit bigger.
And also I have a lot of free time.
I have a question for Suzanne. I love all three presentations, by the way. They look really great, all of them. So, Levina Teerlinc, I mean, is there more research that you want to do looking at that period? More that you want to find? Or is there, do we know all that can be known about Levina Teerlinc?
I don't think we do. I am interested in further research. I don't think we know.
How many other women artists are there?
Not very many. For a while, they were, King Henry VIII was bringing people over from the Low Countries. And then she was Susanna Hornwood, the whole family, so she was another one. I believe that the Low Countries have more of a tradition of allowing women to work in the field as an artist.
We have a Dutch nun, unnamed Dutch nun, who illuminated several manuscripts.
Oh, really?
And I don't know if this is really true or not, but I was trained and told that you can sometimes spot women's illumination because they weren't allowed to handle gold. So what should be gold is painted yellow instead of gold. And that's exactly what this manuscript is.
That's interesting. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Now I'm curious, is there a reason as to why they couldn't handle gold?
I don't think it's because of some sort of evil property of the metal. I think it's more likely value and
They weren't trusted?
they were trusted to have a
Patriarchy.
Well, I was curious, because it's either like
I
not
mean,
trust
that's
or
only
I
my
was
own
like,
read.
ooh,
That's
would
my own
something
reading.
happen?
Maybe they have some notion that they'll see themselves in the reflection of the gold, and I mean, there's that too. And,
Vanity.
That's what would happen then.
Yeah.
What got you interested in art in the beginning? How did you find it?
Well, I was in love. Her father's work. Simon Bank was great illuminator. He was one of the last of the great ones. And the illuminated book was really gradually going away because of the printing press. Bibles could be printed. And so I'm interested in her father's work. And when I found out he had $5, and one of them was an artist, that's how I got interested. I wanted to know more about her. Yeah.
But I also want to know slightly other topic, but the press that you were studying about,
Yes.
working, that's all still going?
Yep. I have since graduating, I've passed it on to a successor, sort of, who's a senior right now at Kutztown University, and she took over my job in overseeing the press and leading some group instruction.
So is there a particular program for it, or is it something that design people or other art people would find as an adjunct to what they're already doing?
Well, as far as the university, there's no like letterpress initiative or class or anything like that. This is something that we thought would just really enhance the communication design department's ability to understand type and have a new medium to work with.
The rogue nature of your whole assignment reminds me of, do you know Kyle? Do you know Kyle? Kyle Jodi? She, several years back now, did a Kickstarter campaign where she bought a truck and outfitted it with a whole printing shop. And Kyle?
Type truck girl.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, and her whole project was called Movable Type.
Yeah.
And she drove around the country and stopped in schoolyards and shopping malls and showed people how to print. But your story has very much that nature. And I just noticed on Facebook that she's busy painting a new truck. So I'm not sure. Maybe you have a future across country.
And some of us have really struggled out of understand how that works.
We've left some rusted trays in the corner as like an initiative to enter our program.
Yeah, there's always more rust.
Yes.
Oh, I had a comment about the mermaids, and someone else might be more of an expert than I am, but I have this memory of the mermaid as a symbol for some branch of the French aristocracy. I think there is and it became a printer's mark oftentimes, which yeah.
They actually do think that because they were looking at printed material from Europe, that is a connection, but it wouldn't have meant the same things to them at all. But there's a couple instances too where the Wonder Fisk shows up, which is like the man fish with like feet and a crown, and like they think that it was printed on paper that came through, and so those sorts of bits were collected as inspiration, but disconnected from the meaning. And also Starbucks.
Well, I think one of the things that has impressed us now all three times is not only the quality of these presentations over all of the fellows, but the variety. And I think this is very much in the spirit of the person in whose honor we are here. I think he would be too. We have a small token of appreciation for the three of you, our chapter pint.
Drink iced tea.
Orange juice.
And I also need to say, as usual, and we can never say this enough times, our thanks to Mark Diminution. And the Library of Congress for hosting us so graciously, and we have a pint glass.
Fantastic. I'm always happy to have you.
So there's a little bit of Mike Denkeriana over there on the table. There are pickup cards about the chapter and about the Denker Fellowship for 2017 also there.
Please take one of the Gaudi broadsides. One of our former Denker Fellows, Chris Sharp, is here today. Help work on it. I think they're enough for everybody.
And thank you.
Great show.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.